You know what's genuinely interesting? While roughly 115 million people are glued to their screens this Sunday, emotionally invested in every play, there's this whole parallel group of people who feel absolutely nothing about it. And I don't mean the performative I'm too cool for sports crowd. I mean people for whom the Super Bowl barely even registers. The hype hits them the same way competitive cheese rolling might hit you. Noted, but emotionally irrelevant. And this is the part most people overlook. For some brains, the Super Bowl simply doesn't land the same way. So let's unpack that. First, caring about sports is not some universal human default. Nobody is born hardwired to lose their mind over a touchdown. What's actually happening when people become deeply invested in the Super Bowl is a complex mix of social identity, emotional projection, and perceived connection to people they've never met. Psychologists even have a name for part of this: basking in reflected glory. Your brain releases feel-good chemicals when your team wins, despite the fact that you personally contributed nothing beyond geographic loyalty and couch occupancy. For people who don't care about the Super Bowl, watching this reaction unfold in others can feel oddly alien. It's like observing a switch flip that simply doesn't exist in your own system. And there's research backing this up. Studies published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology show that people vary dramatically in their optimal stimulation levels. Some nervous systems seek out high-intensity, emotionally charged experiences. Others experience that same intensity as draining or unpleasant. Neither type is better. They're just tuned differently. So when someone says they don't care about the Super Bowl, it's not necessarily an act of rebellion or irony. It might just mean their nervous system prefers calmer, lower arousal experiences. A 3-hour event filled with emotional swings, noise, and tension may feel exhausting instead of thrilling. Then there's the tribal aspect. Humans evolved by forming groups, and sports tap directly into that ancient us versus them circuitry. It sounds dramatic, but the emotional difference between we won and they won mirrors the same psychological patterns that once governed survival-based group competition. But not everyone experiences that pull with the same intensity. Some people satisfy their need for belonging through book clubs, creative communities, online niche spaces, or hobbies that don't involve tracking player stats or arguing about officiating calls. They're not rejecting connection. They're just finding it in places that don't require watching athletes collide for entertainment. Another factor that helps explain the disconnect is something called locus of control. Some people naturally invest emotional energy in situations they can influence. Others are comfortable emotionally engaging with outcomes they have no control over. Watching a football game is, at its core, an exercise in emotional investment without agency. You can yell at the TV, wear lucky clothes, or attempt to manifest outcomes, but none of it affects the game. For some people, the emotional ride itself is enjoyable. For others, that lack of influence makes the experience feel pointless. They'd rather put their attention toward things where effort directly leads to results. Again, neither approach is wrong. They're just different psychological orientations. And then there's overstimulation, which is wildly under-discussed. Modern life already bombards people with alerts, deadlines, social noise, political chaos, and financial stress. For many, the Super Bowl isn't a fun escape. It's just another demand on limited mental bandwidth. This is especially true for highly sensitive individuals who make up roughly 20% of the population. For them, Super Bowl parties can feel like prolonged sensory overload. Loud sounds, bright screens, constant talking, emotional volatility. What's energizing for some is completely depleting for others. Uncertainty tolerance also plays a role. People differ greatly in how comfortable they are with unpredictability. Sports are built on uncertainty. That's the appeal. But for those with lower tolerance for ambiguity, the same suspense can feel stressful rather than exciting. Instead of enjoying the tension, they're just uncomfortable the entire time. When you combine that stress with the fact that the outcome has zero real impact on your life, sitting through hours of manufactured suspense can start to feel less like entertainment and more like optional anxiety. It's the same reason some people love horror films and others avoid them entirely. Different nervous systems respond differently to stress, even when it's framed as fun. Then there's the ritual aspect. The Super Bowl has evolved into a massive cultural performance. The commercials, the halftime show, the themed food, the shared commentary. If football doesn't resonate with you, all that added spectacle can amplify the disconnect. It can feel like being surrounded by people enthusiastically participating in a collective illusion you don't quite understand. That disconnect can be quietly isolating. It's not just boredom, it's the strange feeling of being the only one in the room who missed an unspoken memo. Of course, not everything needs a psychological framework. Sometimes people just don't like football, just like some people dislike cilantro, techno music, or true crime podcasts. We've become so eager to explain every preference that we forget a simple truth. Humans have different tastes. And those tastes don't require a diagnosis. Someone who doesn't care about the Super Bowl might be deeply invested in other sports, arts, or interests. The expectation that everyone should care is honestly more unusual than indifference itself. What's most revealing is how uncomfortable it makes people when someone openly says they don't care about the Super Bowl. The defensiveness that often follows isn't really about the game. It's about identity. Sports function as social glue, and rejecting them can feel, to some, like rejecting the community itself. So if you don't care about the Super Bowl, there's probably a mix of reasons behind that. Maybe your stimulation threshold is lower. Maybe you prefer control over spectacle. Maybe uncertainty feels stressful instead of exciting. Maybe you're just bored, and that's explanation enough. And if you love the Super Bowl, that's just as valid. We don't need identical wiring to coexist. In fact, we probably depend on that diversity. Somehow, 115 million people can lose their minds over a football game while millions of others happily do something else entirely. And society keeps moving. That's the point. That's the whole thing.